This is Erin Sprinkle's final presentation for English to ASL Interpreting with Judy Kegel, Fall 2010. This story is an interpretation of a part of Treasure Island. It's from the chapter entitled Israel Hands. And what's happening is that the ship called the Hispaniola has been taken over by pirates. And all of the original crew, who were decent guys, fled to an island nearby. And the pirates eventually left the ship as well to go find the treasure. And there is the main character, Jim Hawkins, who is a young boy, and he decides that he's going to be brave and he's going to go and get the ship back for his crew. So he gets out there, and when he gets onto the ship, he realizes that he isn't by himself, that there are two pirates still on board. One of them is dead, and he's been killed by the other remaining pirate, whose name is Israel Hands. Israel is a seriously bad guy, and Jim knows he can't trust him, but because he doesn't know how to sail himself, he has to rely on Israel Hands to help him get the ship back to shore. So they end up working together, and the story is going to leave off right as the ship is successfully steered on course towards the island.
The excitement of these last maneuvers had somewhat interfered with the watch I had kept hitherto, sharply enough upon the coxswain. Even then I was still so much interested waiting for the ship to touch, that I had quite forgot the peril that hung over my head, and stood craning over the starboard bulwarks and watching the ripples spreading wide before the bows. I might have fallen without a struggle for my life, had not a sudden disquietude seized upon me, and made me turn my head. Perhaps I had heard a creak, or seen his shadow moving with the tail of my eye. Perhaps it was an instinct like a cat's, but sure enough, when I looked round, there was Hands already halfway towards me, with the dirk in his right hand. We must both have cried aloud when our eyes met, but while mine was the shrill cry of terror, his was the roar of fury like a charging bull's. At the same time he threw himself forward, and I leapt sideways toward the bows. As I did so, I left hold of the tiller, which sprang sharp to leeward, and I think this saved my life, for it struck Hands across the chest, and stopped him for the moment dead. Before he could recover, I was safe out of the corner where he had me trapped, with all the deck to dodge about. Just forward of the mainmast I stopped, drew a pistol from my pocket, took a cool aim, though he had already turned and was once more coming directly after me, and drew the trigger. The hammer fell, but there followed neither flash nor sound. The priming was useless with seawater. I cursed myself for my neglect. Why had I not long before reprimed, and reloaded my only weapons? Then I should not have been, as now, a mere fleeing sheep before this butcher. Wounded as he was, it was wonderful how fast he could move, his grizzled hair tumbling over his face, and his face itself as red as a red ensign, with his haste and fury. I had no time to try my other pistol, nor indeed much inclination, for I was sure it would be useless. One thing I saw plainly. I must not simply retreat before him, or he would speedily hold me boxed into the bows, as a moment since he had so nearly boxed me in the stern. Once so caught, and 9 or 10 inches of the blood-stained dirk would be my last experience on this side of eternity. I placed my palms against the mainmast, which was of a goodish bigness, and waited, every nerve upon the stretch. Seeing that I meant to dodge, he also paused, and a moment or two passed in feints of his part, and corresponding movements upon mine. It was such a game as I have often played at home about the rocks of the Black Hill Cove, but never before, you may be sure, with such a wildly beating heart as now. Still, as I say it was a boy's game, and I thought I could hold my own at it, against an elderly seaman with a wounded thigh. Indeed, my courage had begun to rise so high that I allowed myself a few darting thoughts on what would be the end of the affair, and while I saw certainly that I could spin it out for long, I saw no hope of an ultimate escape. Well, while things stood thus, suddenly the Hispaniola struck, staggered, ground for an instant in the sand, and then, swift as a blow, canted over to the port side, till the deck stood at an angle of 45 degrees, and about a puncheon of water splashed into the scupper holes, and lay in a pool between the deck and the bulwark. We were both of us capsized in a second. Both of us rolled, almost together, into the scuppers. The dead redcap, with his arms still spread out, tumbling stiffly after us. So near were we indeed that my head came against the coxswain's foot, with a crack that made my teeth rattle. Blow and all, I was the first afoot again, for hands had got involved with the dead body. The sudden canting of the ship had made the deck no place for running on. I had to find some new way of escape, and that upon the instant, for my foe was almost touching me. Quick as thought, I sprang into the mizzen shrouds, rattled up hand over hand, and did not draw a breath till I was seated on the crossed trees. I had been saved by being prompt. The dirk had struck not half a foot below me, as I pursued my upward flight, and there stood Israel Hands with his mouth open and his face upturned to mine, a perfect statue of surprise and disappointment. Now that I had a moment to myself, I lost no time in changing the priming of my pistol, and then, having one ready for service, to make an assurance doubly sure, I proceeded to draw the load of the other, and recharge it afresh from the beginning. My new employment struck Hands all of a heap. He began to see the dice going against him, and after an obvious hesitation, he also hauled himself heavily onto the shrouds, and then, with the dirk in his teeth, began slowly and painfully to mount. It cost him no end of time and groans to haul his wounded leg behind him, and I had quietly finished my arrangements before he was much more than a third of the way up. Then, with a pistol in either hand, I addressed him. "One more step, Mr. Hands," said I, "and I'll blow your brains out. Dead men don't bite, you know," I added with a chuckle. He stopped instantly. I could see by the working of his face that he was trying to think, and the process was so slow and laborious that in my newfound security I laughed aloud. At last, with a swallow or two, he spoke, his face still wearing the same expression of extreme perplexity. In order to speak, he had to take the dagger from his mouth, but in all else he remained unmoved. "Jim," says he, "I reckon we're fouled, you and me, and we'll have to sign articles. I'd have had you, but for that there lurch. But I don't have no luck, not I, and I reckon I'll have to strike, which comes hard, you see, for a master mariner to a ship's younker like you, Jim." I was drinking in his words and smiling away, as conceited as a cock upon a wall, when all in a breath, back went his right hand over his shoulder. Something sang like an arrow through the air. I felt a blow and then a sharp pang, and there I was pinned by the shoulder to the mast. In the horrid pain and surprise of the moment, I scarce can say it was by my own volition, and I am sure it was without a conscious aim. Both my pistols went off, and both escaped out of my hands. They did not fall alone. With a choked cry, the coxswain loosed his grip from the shrouds and plunged headfirst into the water.